I could feel very high.
It's a new day on the Enterprise and Tucker's taking photos. Archer's getting a portrait for Starfleet Command and they need reference shots. It'll have to wait though, as we found a planet. It's the titular rogue planet, one not caught in the gravitational pull of a star, and it's somehow managing to support life due to heat from vents. Perhaps that's what's attracted the attention of the ship on the surface. They're not responding to calls, so obviously we're going to fly down and give everything a poke. We land the obligatory away team some distance from them in a clearing of the surprisingly lush vegetation. We'll assume these are mycotrophic plants rather than photosynthetic, given the lack of a local star, and the green hue is just a coincidence. The possibly fungus-eating plants aren't the only forms of life here, and we all draw weapons in case the terrifying alien centipede attacks their toes or some shit. We eventually find a campsite, and it's been recently used based on the embers of a fire. There's nobody here now, but the ship we detected is just a few dozen meters away. Archer sends T'Pol and Reed to find it, while he and Hoshi wait in case whoever's here returns to the camp. It doesn't take long to find them. Actually, that's not strictly true, as it doesn't take long for them to find us. Reed gets knocked on his arse by one armed lad, and T'Pol's dissuaded from intervening by another. Not to worry, though, as the guy who twatted Reed decides we're not what they're looking for and stops pointing his weapon. Back to the camp we all go, where we find Archer has already met our new friends. Hoshi's presumably got the translators working, as one of them talks to us in English, so let's roll out the wheel of names and see what we'll be calling him. Clem Fandango, provided by Admiral Sam Vimes. Clem Fandango's surprised to see anybody else on the planet, as it's apparently a first. Not that this is his planet, but he does say it's special to them. Over a meal, he explains they come here to hunt. It's something his people have done for generations, though he stresses they leave the more evolved primates alone, when T'Pol sounds a bit judgmental. Reed, on the other hand, is fascinated, not by the hunting itself, but rather the techniques Clem Fandango's mates used to sneak up on him. He wants permission to join them and observe, and Clem Fandango seems agreeable to the idea. Reed hanging around gives the rest of them an excuse to do the same, though Hoshi's tagging out for Tucker, who apparently learned nothing on his last ill-fated attempt at camping. They all turn in eventually, save for Archer, so he's alone and dozing when someone calls his name. He follows the sound and eventually finds a woman in a sheer fabric dress, who promptly changes her mind and buggers off. Rather unsurprisingly, the others struggle to believe that Archer really did see a mystery woman in distinctly ill-advised camping clothes seductively calling his name. Saying he had a vague sort of recognition certainly doesn't help convince them, and they all go back to sleep. Morning comes, or whatever they call morning on a planet with no star, and the hunting party prepare to set out with Reed. They're not hanging about, as Clem Fandango tells Archer his people only allow themselves 4 days in every year to hunt here. The waiting list for prospective hunters is subsequently quite significant, and they don't want to piss away their chance. While they hike and hunt, spotting a native space boar in the process, Archer, T'Pol and Tucker are looking at vents. When T'Pol wanders off, Archer admits to Tucker that the whole finding a woman here thing seems very far-fetched, and him choosing to follow her equally out of character. He's adamant it happened, though, and can't explain his behaviour beyond saying he was oddly drawn to her. Odd stuff is happening on the hunt too, as Clem Fandango spots a slug scarpering at speed. So far so normal for alien shit, but he calls it a wraith and seems to regret having done so when Reed asks about it. Another hunter says it could have been a false reading, so Clem Fandango and his buddy go to check, while Reed and another continue the hike. Back to Archer again, who's spotted his mystery woman once more. While Tucker's busy dicking around with a camera, Archer chases after her. He catches up and, after a fiddle with the translator, realizes she's talking English. This, she says, is because she needs him to understand her. He's different, apparently, but she doesn't elaborate further as she becomes distracted at the exact same time the hunters start shooting. She says something about harm, then disappears when Tucker and T'Pol turn up. Archer has the good sense to not mention this new encounter, and instead says he was scanning, with his phone open. To the hunting party once more, where Clem Fandango and his mate are chasing something. It's presumably the giant slug, as that's what twats the other lad and fucks him up. The party returns to camp with the injured guy, and the screaming is sufficient to bring Archer and company as well. When Archer asks what it was, Clem Fandango lies and says it was one of those space balls they passed during the hike. An offer of medical assistance from Phlox is initially declined, until another hunter points out they only have 2 days left and need him back on his feet. Clem Fandango reluctantly changes his mind, but also tries to convince us to leave due to the dangers of their prey. Archer's Starfleet, though, and can smell a mystery. The danger is no longer relevant. Archer's decided to share his second sighting of the mystery woman with T'Pol. He's also scanned for shit in the air to make sure this isn't just another alien plant jizz situation, so it's not a chemically induced hallucination. T'Pol's still not convinced, and that's certainly not helped by him saying he's going to trot off into the wilderness to find her, nor insisting he needs to be alone for it to work. Up on the Enterprise, Phlox is treating his patient. Odd thing, though, he's found cells in the wound that are mutating, ones left by the attacker. Archer's approach has paid off, and he's having another chat with Mystery Woman. Her touching him proves either that she's real or his hallucinations have kicked up a notch, but he seems to think the former. A bit of back and forth establishes she's a member of a species who can appear as anything they want. They're also telepathic, which is why she appeared as someone Archer wanted to see and knows his language. And she did all of this because she needs his help. You see, Archer here is the first visitor she's met who wasn't the same species as the hunters, and that's a problem because Mystery Woman and her kind are what Clem H. Fandango and his buddies are really hunting. Everybody's back at the campsite later on, including the injured hunter, and we're all having a natter. Perhaps Archer's mentioned his last meeting with Mystery Woman to his crew, as the questions from our lot seemed aimed at gathering data. They sound perfectly reasonable on the surface, though, such as asking why anybody would travel to a whole different planet just to hunt space boar. Clem Fandango decides to let slip there's something more impressive here, and tells them all about the so-called wraiths. He even says Archer's Mystery Woman was probably one of them rather than a hallucination, as they're polymorphs and telepathic. It's not real intelligence, though, he says, but rather an instinct, pure mimicry with no understanding behind it. He doesn't explain how he knows this, and goes on to tell them about his dad's hunting party getting mostly slaughtered because the wraiths were able to understand their plan, which is quite the example of cognitive dissonance. The danger is far less these days now the hunters have learned how to track the chemical wraiths give off when afraid, a fact Clem Fandango shares when Archer asks. To the Enterprise we go, where Archer's decided he wants to take a big old shit on Clem Fandango's hunt, and all future ones as well if possible. Phlox's sample from the injured hunter might be able to provide the chemical they track, and off he goes to do a science. Archer's also figured out why he recognizes Mystery Woman, and tells Tucker she's the figure he imagined when he heard some poetry as a kid. There's no time to ponder why a kid was imagining women in translucent fabric, though, as Phlox has come up with the goods. Clem Fandango and his buddies are hunting. More accurately, they're trying to, as they're having a few technical problems. They know they're following a wraith, as one hunter saw them change shape, but the scanners appear to not be working anymore. Firing randomly results in the prey twatting one of them and scarpering, and the hunters decide that a somewhat more level playing field isn't quite so appealing. They're surprised to find Archer and Tucker at the camp when they return, and Archer's not exactly distraught to learn about their failure. One last visit to Mystery Woman confirms she's passed on a chemical doodad to the other wraiths that'll keep them all safe. She thanks him before morphing into a giant slug and buggering off, so we'll leave Archer to wonder if he could have ever loved a mollusk, as we get ready to take another step on the long road. Pitch Black is a cult sci-fi movie about people trapped on a planet plunged into darkness by an eclipse and trying to survive the horrors this darkness summons. It was more successful than anticipated and spawned sequels, as well as being largely responsible for launching Vin Diesel's career. To be clear, I'm not saying there's a definite connection between Pitch Black, which was released at the end of 2000, and this episode, which was released at the start of 2002. Pitch Black didn't exactly come up with the idea in the first place, after all. What I would say is that this would not be the first time Star Trek has released a story that just happens to share themes or ideas present in contemporary popular culture. Sometimes these snippets stick in your brain and come out again with a new coat of paint, even if it's not a conscious choice. With that coincidence noted and addressed, let's talk about the episode itself. To be blunt, it's not great. I think a lot of the problem with it is that we've seen the basic premise, that of hunting a sentient species, done significantly better and with more to consider elsewhere. Captive Pursuit from Deep Space Nine made it far more interesting ethically with the inclusion of a willing prey. And the Hirogen from Voyager were a better example of a species where hunting is their culture. If we're generous, we could try and say that last point is deliberate. The hunters in this episode feel more like overeager office workers on a paintballing day out, and look like it too, thanks to those full goggles. I'd like to believe it's an intentional admonishment of toxic masculinity, some schmucks getting wankered by a campfire before causing a sentient being to feel fear, just so they can pretend they're more than they are. Such a reading feels too charitable, though, based on the compliments Reed gives of their skill, and one of the writers saying the anti-hunting sentiment was accidental, as they didn't want it to be preachy. There's probably a conversation to be had there about how the hunters became laughable unintentionally, and what that might say about the self-image of those involved in their creation, but we'll leave it there for now. Of far more interest than the story are the incidental bits. T'Pol breaks character by providing an admonishment to strangers, for example. Pointing out that the hunters kill the indigenous species feels like a judgment, which is curious for the distinctly non-interference member of our crew. Perhaps that's because it pushes a few of her buttons. She's a vegetarian, of course, for a start, but maybe the destruction of another life form for sport feels against the principle of idic. If so, being provoked into interference because you're offended by others ignoring non-interference is rather ironic. On that same principle of interference provoking interference, you could argue that this is the first example we see of what will eventually become one of the few exemptions to the Prime Directive. The hunters' actions here are upsetting the natural development of the native inhabitants, and Archer correcting it would have been permissible even under the far more strict rules of future Starfleet. Let's end this one with some wild conjecture, shall we? I'm sure I'm not the only one who noted the shape-shifting abilities of the wraiths and thought about the changelings of Deep Space Nine. There are some significant differences, of course. The wraith natural form seems to be a slug for a start, but physical aspects are nothing to a species who can change them at will. That they're telepathic is a greater difference, but then we have no indication that changelings are fundamentally incapable of this. In fact, you could argue that changelings being resistant to telepathy is an indicator of the potential for something more. So, is it possible that the wraiths here are an offshoot of the Gamma Quadrant changelings? Might they perhaps be the direct result of one of the 100 infant changelings the Founders sent out to explore the galaxy? We have no solid data for how far back in history that happened, other than a long time ago. The Dominion has existed for at least 2,000 years, if the Vorta are to be believed, and we already know the Founders consider their plans in terms of centuries. Is any of the stuff I've just said likely? To be blunt, no. Shapeshifting is probably another of those ideas that got picked up unintentionally and deposited back here, along with the concept of a planet in darkness and hunting sentient species. End of episode.
How many people are actually on this ship, by the way?
What difference does that make? We've got majority support.
No, we've got majority support of the officers. Tucker's probably got a big department just to keep the bloody thing flying, but how many others are there? We're supposed to be exploring, so how big's the science crew?
No idea. All humans look the same to me.
So how do you tell the difference with the ones you talk to?
My lower deck guy calls me master. Tucker thinks I'm an Ewok, and Reed's always fondling a gun. With anyone else, I just wait until someone uses their name first.
Christ's sake, which means we don't actually know the numbers involved then.
No, we do not.
So, how are we handling that?
Well, Dr. Flock said he could pump hallucinogenic gas through the ventilation system.
No, woof.